By the time she was 17, half the world had heard Judy Garland's voice. Almost no one knew she was already dependent on the pills a movie studio kept handing her. That gap between the girl audiences thought they were watching and the one who actually existed would follow her for the rest of her life. She was born Frances Gumm on June 10, 1922, in Grand Rapids, Minnesota. The name Judy Garland came years later. Her parents, Frank and Ethel, were former vaudeville performers who ran the local movie theater, and they already had 2 older daughters. When Frances was 4, the family left Minnesota for California, and the 3 girls' careers became the center of family life. They had a small act called the Gumm Sisters, but there was something about Frances that always pulled focus. She was the smallest and the youngest, but her voice did not sound like a child's. Even at 9, reviewers singled her out. The name change came in 1934. The sisters were playing a theater in Chicago, and the comedian George Jessel suggested they drop the name Gumm, which audiences kept mishearing. They became the Garland Sisters. Frances liked the new last name and soon picked a new first name to match, Judy. A year later, the act had mostly run its course, but the youngest sister had not. In September 1935, Judy sang for the people who ran MGM, the biggest studio in Hollywood. They signed her on the spot, a 13-year-old with no screen test and a contract worth $100 a week. It was a remarkable sum in the middle of the Depression. Her father did not live to see most of what came next. He died of meningitis later that year. Judy had been close to him in a way she never quite managed with her mother. For the rest of her life, she spoke about losing him as one of the deepest wounds she carried. At first, the studio did not know what to do with her. She was too old to be a cute child performer and too young to play a leading lady. She was also short, just under 5 feet, with a look that did not fit the glamorous mold MGM liked to sell. So they put her in short films and ensemble pieces while they made up their minds. The thing that worried them most was her body. Studio executives wanted their actresses thin and camera ready, and they were blunt about it. Reports from the era have the head of the studio, Louis B. Mayer, calling her cruel names about her weight. He treated a teenager's appearance as a problem to be managed, and she heard all of it. Their solution set the course of her whole life. The studio put her on a punishing diet of broth, black coffee, and cigarettes to kill her appetite. Then came the pills, amphetamines to keep her thin and awake through long days, and barbiturates at night so she could finally sleep. She was not the only young performer this happened to. Mickey Rooney, her frequent co-star, later described the same routine. By Judy's account, they would be worked past exhaustion and given pep pills to keep going. Then they were taken to the studio doctor and knocked out, and after a short rest, the cycle would start again. It is worth saying that her mother had reportedly given her pills even earlier, before she turned 10, to manage her energy on the road. So by the time the studio took over, the idea that a pill could fix how you felt was already familiar to her. Hollywood simply made it bigger and more relentless. She was a child caught inside a system built for profit. Judy was paired again and again with Mickey Rooney in a run of cheerful, fast-moving musicals. The Andy Hardy films made them a beloved screen team, 2 energetic kids singing their way through small-town America. The movies were enormously popular and cheap to make. Behind the brightness, both performers were being run ragged. Then came the role that changed everything. In 1939, at 16, she played Dorothy Gale in The Wizard of Oz. The studio bound her figure to keep her looking younger, and the shoot was long and physically hard. None of that strain reached the screen. What audiences saw was a girl in a gingham dress singing Over the Rainbow. That song became hers forever. It was nearly cut from the film, dismissed by some executives as slowing things down, and it survived only because others fought for it. She would sing it for the next 30 years, and it would mean something different in every decade. The picture made her an international name. She won a special miniature Oscar created for young performers. At 17, Judy was one of the most recognizable faces in the world, the wholesome girl next door that families adored. The contrast with what was happening to her off-camera was already stark. Through the early 1940s, she carried film after film. She grew into more grown-up parts and proved she could act as well as sing. Meet Me in St. Louis in 1944 is often pointed to as the moment she truly arrived as an adult star. It also changed her personal life. While making that film, she fell for its director, Vincente Minnelli. He became her second husband in 1945. Her first marriage to the musician David Rose had ended a few years earlier and had barely had a chance to begin. With Minnelli, she had her first child, Liza, born in 1946. For a short while, the picture looked something like happiness, but the pace never let up, and the pills never stopped. By 1947, she was unraveling. While making The Pirate, she had what was described as a nervous breakdown, behaving erratically and unable to work steadily. The studio's answer was to bring a psychiatrist onto the set, mostly so she could keep filming. The next few years were a slow collapse of the thing the studio had built. Judy started showing up late, or not at all. She was pulled from one production after another, including Annie Get Your Gun and Royal Wedding. Each removal made her harder to insure and harder to trust with a schedule. In 1950, it reached a breaking point. She was deeply depressed and exhausted, and after one of these dismissals, she attempted to do something drastic to herself. The incident became public, which only deepened her humiliation. Soon after, the studio that had shaped her since she was 13 let her go. 15 years of her life had been spent inside that system. She had earned the studio fortunes, and she left it broke in spirit and tangled in her own dependencies. She was 28 years old. Hollywood had decided she was finished, but Judy had other plans. The comeback began on a stage, a long way from any film set. In 1951, she went to London and played the Palladium, standing in front of a live audience with nothing to hide behind. It worked, and not by a small margin. The crowds were enormous and the reviews were rapturous. She brought the same act to New York and played the Palace Theater for 19 straight weeks, a record run. Stripped of the studio gloss, just a woman and a microphone, she turned out to be one of the great live performers of the century. Around this time, she married for the third time. Sid Luft was a producer who became her husband, her manager, and the father of 2 more children, Lorna and Joey. He believed in her ability to come back, and he helped engineer the next big swing. That swing was a return to the movies on her own terms. In 1954, she starred in A Star is Born for Warner Brothers. She played a singer on the rise opposite a fading star, and she poured everything into it. The performance is still regarded as the finest of her career. Critics who had written her off were stunned by what she could do. The film led to an Academy Award nomination, and she was the favorite to win. On Oscar night, she was in a hospital bed, having just given birth to her son Joey. A camera crew was set up in her room to capture the acceptance speech everyone expected. Then she lost, by one of the narrowest margins in the awards history. The defeat stung in a way that went beyond a single trophy. It felt like Hollywood telling her again that she was still unwanted. The film roles that followed never matched what A Star is Born had promised. Whatever else she did on screen, the industry kept her at arm's length. So she returned to the place that never turned her away, which was the concert stage. Through the late 1950s, her health was poor and her weight climbed, and there were stretches when she could barely work. By 1959, she was seriously ill and needed long medical treatment. Many assumed her performing days were over. She convalesced, lost the weight, rested her voice, and built a new kind of show. The format was simple and bold. She got rid of the costumes and the comedy bits, leaving just her, an orchestra, and a long program of songs. She and her team called the idea, half joking, Just Judy. It led to the night she is perhaps most loved for. On April 23, 1961, she walked onto the stage at Carnegie Hall in New York. The hall was packed past its limit, more than 3,000 people, with famous faces scattered through the crowd. For 2 hours, she held them completely. People who were there described it in almost religious terms. One reviewer compared the feeling in the room to a faith healing. The whole concert was recorded and released as a double album, Judy at Carnegie Hall. It sold and sold, sat at the top of the charts for months, and won the Grammy for Album of the Year. That award made her the first woman ever to win in that category. She had been written off so many times that the comeback itself became part of her appeal. Audiences responded to more than her voice. They felt they were watching someone survive in public, and they loved her for it. Then came the television show, which should have secured her future. In 1963, she got her own weekly variety series on CBS, The Judy Garland Show. But the network put it in a hopeless time slot opposite Bonanza, one of the most popular shows on television. The ratings could not compete, and the show was canceled after a single season. For her, it was more than a professional setback. It had been steady work, the kind of income that could have given her stability. When it ended, the financial ground under her began to give way. The money troubles were not entirely her own doing. Over the years, she had been handled by managers and advisors who mismanaged or simply took her earnings. By the mid-1960s, she owed enormous sums to the tax authorities. The fortune she had generated since childhood had mostly slipped through her fingers. She kept working because she had to. In 1967, she returned to the Palace, the New York theater that had once welcomed her. This time, she brought her children, Lorna and Joey, on stage with her. Even there, the trouble followed, and on closing night, tax agents seized most of what she had earned. Her personal life kept fracturing in the same period. The marriage to Sid Luft ended after years of conflict. A fourth marriage to Mark Herron was brief and unhappy. By the late 1960s, she was often staying with friends, her health failing, her body worn down by decades of pills and drink. In late 1968, she took a 5-week engagement at a London nightclub, partly because she needed the money. The shows had become famous for how painful they could be. There were evenings when people threw things at the stage. For a woman who had spent her whole life needing the love of a crowd, the heckling must have been a particular kind of wound. And yet she kept walking out there. The hunger to perform and to be wanted never left her. During that London stretch, she married for the 5th time to a young nightclub manager named Mickey Deans. People close to her saw it as another bad decision in a long line of them. She was tired, broke, and looking for someone to lean on. The marriage lasted only months. On June 22, 1969, she was found dead in the bathroom of her London home. She was 47. The coroner ruled it an accidental overdose of barbiturates, the same kind of pills that had been put in her hands at the start of her life. The autopsy also found that years of drinking had badly damaged her liver. The truth is that her body had been failing for a long time. She had survived so many crises that her sudden death still shocked the people who loved her. The girl who sang about a place over the rainbow was gone. The grief that followed was enormous and went well beyond ordinary celebrity mourning. Thousands of people lined up to pass her casket in New York. She had a devoted following among gay men who saw in her struggles and her resilience something of their own experience. Her funeral fell in the same week as the Stonewall Uprising, and many have linked the two, though the connection is debated. It helps remember how young she was when the machine took hold of her. She never had an ordinary childhood and never got to decide for herself what kind of life she wanted. The same talent that made her famous made her useful, and the people around her used it hard. She paid for their profits with her health. She also left a family that carried the work forward. Her daughter Liza Minnelli became a major star in her own right. Lorna and Joey kept their mother's memory alive and spoke honestly about what she had endured. There is a temptation to reduce her to a cautionary tale, the child star ruined by Hollywood. That is part of it, but it sells her short. For all the chaos, she gave audiences decades of performances that still hold up. The films are watched now by people who were not born when she died. The Carnegie Hall album has never gone out of print. Maybe that is the honest way to leave her. She was a hugely gifted person who was handed an impossible situation at 13 and kept performing through all of it. She wanted to be loved, and millions of people did love her. A long time after her death, plenty of them still do.